Okay, you're good to go. Have a good session.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon, good evening. We have 6 talks in the session. Please use the Zulip chat for posting questions. If not Zulip, you can post it even on Zoom here. Okay, the first talk is on updatable signatures and Max. And Valerio Sini will give the talk.
Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thanks for the introduction. And so I said I will be talking about updatable signature and message authentication codes. So the motivation for this work was the observation that, as in the context of encryption, also for authentication, so for signature and MAX, it is important to follow good key management practices and to periodically switch keys. So this to avoid the risk of the key being compromised if used for an extended period of time. So the solution for this problem that we envision is a primitive where the user can rotate keys and at the same time compute a so-called update token that allows the user to update signatures or MAX from the old key to the new one. So the framework we have in mind is the following. So the timeline is divided into different epochs, and in each epoch, the user has an associated key pair. Using this key pair, it can sign arbitrary messages and then store the signature in some database, for example. And then whenever it wants to rotate keys, it will next algorithm, which computes the key pair for the following epoch together with this so-called update token that can be sent to the database and be used to update the signature it was storing. So now this new signature will verify for the same message under the new public key of the user. So in our work, we formally define these new primitives, so updatable signature and updatable message authentication codes. And we also provided 2 different security notions for these new primitives. So one is linkable updates, which basically says that updated signatures and MAX are indistinguishable from fresh ones. And also existential unforgeability under chosen message attack. So here, as done for updatable encryption, we have to define what is the so-called leakage profile. So since the primitive allows for updating old cryptographic objects to a new one, the adversary can gain extra information besides what is modeled by the oracle in the security experiment. So we have to define what kind of leakages we allow for the adversary. And we settled for allowing bidirectional updates of signatures and keys, since this allows for a more simpler and cleaner security definition of the model. And also, and it doesn't really give a weaker model, since in the real world, anyway, all keys are revoked. And we also allow the adversary to derive intermediate tokens once it has access to pairs of consecutive secret keys. So to give a short example, suppose the adversary in the security experiment queries the oracle to have access to all the information in green. Then using the updatability property of the primitive, it can derive extra information. So for example, you can use this token to downgrade the secret key from epoch E-2 to epoch E-3. Then it could derive the intermediate token using this pair of consecutive keys. And then it could use the token to upgrade this signature to the next epoch. And similarly, it can derive other information till all the information that is colored either in green or in blue is accessible to the adversary. Moreover, we also provided some concrete construction of this new primitive. So we provided a generic construction of updatable MAX from keyomorphic PRFs and of updatable signature from keyomorphic signatures. We also provided message-independent variants of the above construction. So by message-independent variants, we mean that the update algorithm does not need to take the message as input, and this allows for a more efficient construction. And we also provide post-quantum association from lattices of both UMAC from almost skeuomorphic PRFs and of updatable signature from a modification of the GPV signature scheme, which however we were not able to prove secure in the general security model, but only in a weakened version of it. So like a short overview is this of the following construction for updatable signature. And as said, the GPV lattice-based construction is only proved secure in this weakened model. And these are the UMAX construction, where again, for the lattice-based construction, we only are able to have a limited number of possible updates, since with each update, the error increases and we cannot guarantee correctness otherwise. And I will conclude with a couple of open questions. So as I said, we were not able to prove the security of the lattice-based, the full security of the lattice-based UAS. So this is one open question to be solved, and also to provide concrete bounds for the number of updates allowed in the UMAC construction from almost skeuomorphic PRF. I'm happy to take any question if there are.
Thanks, Valerio. Perhaps you can wait for a minute while people post questions on Zolib. I have a question. So even the weaker security model is achieved in the random oracle model for the lattice-based construction?
Yes, because it's.
Is there anything in the standard model?
Not that we worked on. We will have to take a different signature scheme based from lattices, which is proved in the standard model, and then try to also achieve updatability and see how it would work.
See. And another question is, so you all consider bidirectional updatability. If you have a token, then you can
yes,
both take it to the next
and,
epoch as well as the previous
downgrade.
Yes. Right. Would it make sense to look at a unidirectional one? Would that make it easier to construct this primitive?
No, actually, I mean, so this GPV-based scheme is actually only has unidirectional updates, and that's why we were not able to even prove the updates on linkability property of the scheme. And yes, and also basically all the security proofs that we have require that the scheme satisfy these bidirectional updates. And we prove the security of the updatable scheme by relying on the enforgeability of the underlying signature scheme, updating in both directions, signatures or max. So actually having only unidirectional would make it more difficult to instantiate.
I see. Okay. Looks like there are no other questions. So thanks again.
Thanks.
Perhaps we can move on to the next talk. The next talk is on more efficient digital signatures with tight user security, and Dennis Demert will give the talk.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Let me quickly share my screen. Okay, so can you see my slides?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so hi. This is joint work with Kai Gellert, Tibor Jager, and Lin Lu. So let me give you a short introduction to our paper. So in our paper, we consider tightly secure signatures in the multi-user setting with adaptive corruptions. This setting seems to reflect the security requirements we have in applications where signatures are used as a building block much more directly than the usually considered single-user setting in the form of EUCMA security. A prime example for such an application is authenticated key exchange, which often uses signatures to authenticate its protocol messages. Our construction is the first generic construction of this kind, and it's based on loss identification schemes and sequential OR proofs. Signatures from sequential OR proofs were originally proposed by Abe et al. At Asia Crypt 02, and further studied by Fischlin et al. At Eurocrypt 2020. Furthermore, our construction is the first strongly unforgeable one, and again, this is particularly useful in the context of authenticated key exchange, because it gives you a strong notion of authentication, which is called matching conversations. Furthermore, we were able to refine the construction that was considered by Abe et al. And Fischlin et al. To shorten the signatures. Concretely, this means that when instantiated with DDH, our signatures consist only of 3 ZQ elements. So just to give you a comparison, compared to DSA, which has like 2 ZQ elements, but it does not have a tight security proof, not even in the single user setting. And all of these properties, so tightness, strong unforgeability, and short signatures, make our signature a perfect candidate to instantiate tightly secure authenticated key exchange with. So the title of our paper is More Efficient Digital Signatures with Tight Multi-User Security. So let's have a look at the current state of the art. So to the best of our knowledge, there are only 2 tightly secure signatures in the multi-user setting with adaptive corruptions. And the important part here is the adaptive corruptions part, because there are a couple of multi-user secure signatures, but they do not support adaptive corruptions. On the one hand, we have the BHJKL scheme, TCC15, which was basically the first such signature scheme, and it was introduced in the context of tightly secure authenticated key exchange. But unfortunately, as you see here on the slide, it suffers from quite a large signature size. So it's linear in the security parameter many group elements. However, it is pairing-based, and it is in the standard model. On the other hand, we have Gyosten and Jager, Crypto 18, which significantly were able to reduce the signature size by requiring a programmable random oracle. And now we were able to even further reduce the signature size to 3 ZQ elements when instantiated with DDH. However, we have slightly larger keys, so 4 group elements instead of 2. But we do not require a programmable random oracle, but only a non-programmable one. This was already shown by Fischlin et al. In the single user setting, and we were able to carry it over to the multi-user setting. And as you see here in the last column, our scheme is also the only scheme that is strongly unforgeable. Next, let me briefly talk about the impact of our scheme on authenticated key exchange protocols. So tight multi-user secure signatures with adaptive corruptions are the main building block for tightly secure authenticated key exchange. As I already said, this seems to exactly reflect what we need from a signature scheme in this context. So yeah, in fact, the notion was introduced to construct the first tightly secure authenticated key exchange protocol. And tight security is something that's particularly interesting in the context of AKE due to its large-scale use. So if you think of the most prominent example of a key exchange protocol, TLS, then yeah, you quite quickly see the large scale that we have here. And usually the security proof of authenticated key exchange protocols are particularly loose, which makes them not that meaningful for practice. And if we now look at this table here on the slide, you see that for all recently proposed or proven to be tightly secure authenticated key exchange protocols, our signature scheme improves the communication complexity measured in bytes for security parameter 128 bits. And compared with the previously most efficient scheme by Gyosten and Jager, we were almost able to halve the bytes that need to be transferred. So let's recap the key points of our work. So we construct the first strong and currently most efficient multi-user secure signature with adaptive corruptions that is tightly secure. Our construction is perfectly suitable for instantiating tightly secure authenticated key exchange because we have strong unforgeability, which gives you strong authentication in the sense of matching conversation. And we have short signatures, which gives you an overall efficient key exchange. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to receive any questions. And if you're interested in our work, then please consider reading the paper. The link is on the slide.
Oh, thanks, Dennis. Let's wait for maybe to post questions. In the meanwhile, I have a couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
What are the concrete instantiations for your scheme?
So we have one, yeah?
Yeah, sorry, go on.
So we have essentially 2 instantiations, one based on DDH and one based on the phi hiding assumption. So these are instantiations of the lossy identification scheme, which then can be used directly in the construction.
I see. Okay. Secondly, so there's a 1 by n loss immediate construction that you can get from any signature scheme, right? Are there anything that's better than 1 by n, but say not as good as O of 1 loss? And secondly, are there any barriers to reductions based on generic signature schemes?
Sorry, you broke up a little bit for me. Can you repeat the first question?
Oh, sorry, I think there's an issue with my Wi-Fi. So my question was, is there anything in between 1 by n security loss and O of 1 security loss? So 1 by n you can achieve from any signature scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything in between 1 by n and O of 1?
Yeah. So in fact, there is an optimization of this BH-JKL scheme, which has a loss that is linear in the security parameter, which is called almost tight. But I was informed by one of the authors that there is a flaw in the proof, so I didn't mention it on this table here, but in the video version, I mentioned this briefly. Yeah, so there is something in between, which is called almost tight. And the second question, I forgot about it, sorry. Can you repeat it?
So I was asking, is there any barrier to, can we prove that we cannot build, we cannot achieve multi-user security based on just single-user security? Is there any barrier?
Yeah, so there is an impossibility result, exactly. But this only holds for certain signature schemes. I think, if I remember correctly, they need to be key re-randomizable. So given a verification key, you need to be able to efficiently randomize the corresponding secret key. So only for those, the impossibility result applies, and this is not the case for our scheme.
Okay, great. Looks like there are no other questions in the chat.
Depending on what you mean by random, right?
Yeah. So what do you exactly mean by that? So
well, no one has ever been able to prove randomness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's all I mean.
Yeah. Yes, you're right.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Great. If not, thanks, Dennis. Move on
Thank you very
to
much.
Next talk. The next talk will be by Olivier Sanders. And Olivier will tell us about improving revoking for group signatures and redactable signatures.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this talk is about revoking group signature. So briefly, a group signature is a primitive that allows users to join a group by interacting with the so-called group manager. Once this is done, they can sign on behalf of the group, meaning that the signatures are anonymous except for a specific entity. And we can use group signature for many use cases, in particular for anonymous access to the service. Because using a group signature, the user can prove, for example, that he has subscribed to the service without revealing his identity. But the main problem of group signature is that adding new users is easy, but revoking older ones are much harder. And the problem is that we cannot simply dismiss revocation because this is a very common event. For example, you may have to revoke a user because his subscription has ended, or you may have to revoke him because he has lost his credential or because he did not comply with the code of conduct. And the problem is that also there are several solutions to manage revocation for group signature. None of them is fully satisfying, as I explained in the paper. But actually, Xu et al. Proposed a new variant of group signature, which is called group signature with time-bound keys, that distinguish two kinds of revocations. There is first the natural revocation that you can predict as a joining time. So typically, when a user joins a service for, let's say, 1 month, you know that you will have to deactivate his signing keys after 1 month. So you can predict it at the joining time. And there is also premature revocation that you cannot predict. So for example, revocation due to the non-compliance with the code of conduct. And the point is that natural revocation and premature revocation are dealt with very differently, because natural revocation will be done by associating hidden set of time period with each signing key, whereas premature revocation will be managed by with the revocation list. And in most scenarios, you will be able to manage revocation with natural revocation, which is very efficient. So you will have few premature revocation, and so you will have short revocation list, which is very important regarding efficiency. To construct this group signature with time-bound keys, we propose to use unlinkable redactable signature. This is a primitive that was introduced a few years ago that allows a signer to generate a signature sigma on a set of messages. And given this signature sigma, you can derive a new signature sigma prime on any subset of the signed messages. And the point is that sigma prime can be verified with the sole knowledge of the subset of messages. In particular, all the other messages are redacted. Moreover, you can make this derived signature unlinkable, which will be very important in our construction. So just to provide the basic idea for construction, it's actually very simple. During the joining time, the group manager will simply issue a redactable signature on a set of messages where the message will be 0 if the user is inactive at this time period. And given this signature, the user can simply prove that he is active at the current time period by simply deriving a signature on the message corresponding to this time period, and by showing that this message is not 0. And the point is that it can be done very efficiently with the construction proposed in the paper. Moreover, conversely to previous works, we do not need update information. That is information that the group manager publishes at the beginning of each time period, which is very interesting because it's not very convenient to update the public key with this information at the beginning of each time period. Obviously, this is just the basic idea of the construction. There are several additional elements in the paper to achieve security, but I think that if you have understood this basic idea, it should be rather simple to understand the remaining parts of the paper. So, as I said, just the previous idea is just some kind of framework, but the point is that it can be instantiated very efficiently with the construction described in the paper. In particular, with this construction of unlinkable redactable signature, we can achieve very short derived signature consisting of only 4 group elements, and that can be verified with only 2 pairing equations. So this leads to a very efficient group signature scheme with group signatures that only consist of 300 bytes, which is rather small for a scheme supporting such revocation features. As I said, there is no need to publish update information, meaning that the group manager can publish a group public key once and for all. There are short signing keys, and for the signer, for the user that produce the group signature, there is only a few computation to perform to issue this group signature. Similarly, for the verification, this is rather efficient as long as the revocation list does not grow too much. Okay, thank you. Then do not hesitate if you have any questions.
Yes, I have a question. This seems ideal for electronic passports and such, which are already issued internationally by some sort of international, presumably US imposed standard. How does your scheme improve on that?
For example, with electronic passports, there is indeed a signature scheme that is used for that, but this is a standard digital signature without any privacy notions. So it means that you use a basic digital signature scheme. And so, for example, each time you use your passport, you can be traced. With this kind of solution, such as group signatures, you are totally unlinkable. So you can use your passport at different places, and no one will be able to say that you are the same person.
But still be able to verify that the passport you're presenting to them has been issued by a trusted third party that you trust.
Exactly. You prove that you are, for example, a French citizen, but no one can know that who you are exactly, and no one can trace you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Olivier. I think there's a question so what is the size of the public key, and does it depend on the number of time periods?
Yes, as you can see on the slide, the public key is the left cell on my first table. Yes, it depends linearly on the set of time periods, but I provide some concrete estimation in my paper, and you have to, even if you consider 1 day time period for the next 3 years, you end up with something with a few kilobytes. That's not a lot to store for public key. That can be quite complex. Thank you.
Thanks. Are there other questions? Since we have a couple of minutes, I have a quick question. So here in this slide, our location list.
I'm sorry, I have trouble to hear you. So,
sorry, I asked, so in this slide, R is the size of the revocation list, right?
Yes. R is a number of persons, but only people that have been prematurely revoked. As I said, the point is that for natural revocation, you will use other techniques to do that. So this will have no impact on the revocation list. So here, R is only the people that you need to revoke immediately, for example, because they are for very exceptional cases. So you should be able, in many scenarios, to R relatively small.
Okay, I see. Yeah. Thanks. Are there any other questions? Let's see. Okay, Markov has another question. How do you do premature revocations?
With a revocation list. So it's some rather standard techniques that consist in adding some revocation token in a public list, and anyone that verifies the signature will check that the signature has not been issued with the key corresponding to the token in your list. So it's difficult to describe how it works exactly without paper, because it's not very simple, in particular because you have to ensure both.
It's a blacklist. It's a blacklist.
Yes, it's a form of blacklist, but a bit more complex, because this is an anonymous system. You cannot just provide the name of the user or something like that. You have to be able to make it compatible with an anonymous system, and revoking anonymous signature is notoriously hard. So it's a kind of blacklist, as you say, but
notoriously an unsolved problem.
What? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Establishing an anonymous blacklist is notoriously an unsolved problem, correct? Does your solution solve that problem?
Actually, I'm not the only paper to solve this issue. The idea is that in our case, anonymity rely on some specific computational problem. But if you provide some additional information in the revocation list, then you can break this problem. And so you can identify the issue of the group signature. So this is not a technique that is specific to my paper. It has been already used in previous papers, but in our case, it's a bit more complex because I have to ensure both forward and backward and linkability.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks, Olivier. Yes, we can move on to the next talk. Adam, do you want to take over?
Yeah, hi. So the next talk is going to be group signatures with user-controlled and sequential linkability by Jesus Diaz and Anya Lehman, and Jesus will give the talk.
Okay, yes, thank you, Adam. Let me share my screen. You see the slides?
Yes, that looks
Okay.
good.
Okay, great. So thank you for the introduction. As Adam said, my name is Jesus Diaz, and I'm going to present joint work with Anya Lehman entitled Group Signatures with User-Controlled and Sequential Linkability. I was going to introduce group signatures, but since Olivier already did that brilliantly, I will skip that part and just mention that group signatures typically rely on a central party who can extract some kind of identifying information from the signers. Now, the bad part of this is that this is privacy invasive, and we need to place some trust on this central entity. So our challenge is whether we can get rid of this trusted party, which, by the way, is typically called opener. So think of this scenario illustrated here, in which we have a group with two users, a red user and a blue user, who send digitally signed information to a data lake, for instance. We want all these signatures to be completely anonymous to any observer, included any possible trusted party, unless the users themselves decide to link a subset of their signatures. In that case, any observer, not only trusted parties, would be able to verify that linked claim. Concerning the functionality that we propose for these UCL group signatures, it is very similar to that of conventional group signatures. Basically, we just replace the open function with this link function, in which needs to be run by the user who wants to link his or her signatures. And instead of being parameterized by the group secret key, it is parameterized by the group secret key of that specific group member. And of course, we have a verify link operation who just says whether this proof is valid or not. A few words on the model and instantiation. The model is very similar to that of conventional group signatures. We have anonymity, non-permeability, and traceability, although since we want to provide two types of linkability, which are similar but different, basically we call them explicit and implicit linkability, we need to introduce two variants for the non-permeability and traceability properties. We also have to account for more trivial wins that are derived from the link function that we introduce. And we have to follow a different approach because basically we don't have an open function, which is crucial for the traditional definitions. So we have to give a different one. Concerning our instantiation, we use PPS plus signatures for the membership credentials, and then the signed randomization proof approach for creating the actual signatures. And we also introduce a trick for creating efficient link proofs. Okay, so far so good. UCL signatures are great for privacy because they give users full control, basically. But this means that users can also very easily hide data, which can be good in some cases, but can also be not good in other cases. And specifically in the use case that we were targeting, we were interested in ensuring that users cannot alter the order in which set of signatures were created, meaning that they cannot omit, insert signatures, not swap them. To illustrate this, think of a scenario in which we have smart vehicles that send telemetry data that gets stored into a data lake. So in the case of this example, we have the blue car who is driving through a highway with a 100 kilometers per hour speed limit. And since the driver respects the speed limit, in case of needing to link all the signatures that he created, he will probably not have any problem to do so. But in this other case, in which the red car eventually goes beyond the speed limit, then maybe it has an accident. In case, for instance, an insurance company asks the driver to link the signatures that he produced in that time interval, then the driver would be interested in hiding this specific signature because it was actually the one in he oversped. So that's the one of the use cases we consider. Then we extend the UCL signatures just briefly. Basically, the signature algorithm becomes stateful, and we have to pass some sequencing information, and also the link and verify link processes become sequential link and verify sequential link. The proof now carries some extra order information, and the set of signatures that is given is an ordered set. The model is similar to that of UCL. We have to add, of course, a new property ensuring sequentiality, the property that we want to ensure. And we have to account for more trivial wins, stemmed from the order that we leak. The instantiation is also very similar to UCL signatures. We introduce a hash chain for ensuring the order. And we also rely on an append-only bulletin board where signers send their signatures. This append-only bulletin board is trusted to verify signatures before appending them, but otherwise cannot link or open the signatures. I will not go into details here. The instantiations that we propose are reasonably efficient. You have more measurements in the paper, which have been obtained using this library, which is open sourced. It supports several languages and also several schemes. It can be extended if needed. There is a demo that you can play with. It's accessible through Docker if you want to play around a bit. And for further work, I will just mention some. It would be interesting to create proofs of not linked signatures, sorry, because that would allow us to introduce some important functionality like blacklisting or something like that. It would be interesting to study what security we can get against initially corrupt users, and also batch verification would be nice. And that was everything. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any question.
Okay, so let's thank Jesus.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How does this different than current SSBN, which stands for Submarine Nuclear Ballistic Missile Submarines, initial launch tracking systems? Like what?
Yeah, sorry, go on. So I'm not familiar with that functionality or system, so I cannot really comment on that. I don't know if you have any specific question maybe about it. Hello, can you hear me?
Sorry, for sure. But the history of American submarine ballistic missiles has been an increase in their accuracy, or their 50% CPM, or whatever it is. And that seems fundamentally associated with your research into motion tracking and the accuracy and authenticity of that measurement. That's my question, I suppose.
So about the authenticity, I guess that this could be used for that. About the accuracy, I would say I don't really know. I guess that the accuracy part is something like depending on a GPS or some triangulation or something, but that's not something that a group signature seems to be able to address.
Unless it's in orbit.
Oh yeah, but then the same, I guess the same comment applies. But for if ensuring order of the messages that are sent or the measurements or something is something important in that case, and also anonymity or privacy of the missiles is relevant, then I guess that this can be related to that. So I would have to study that use case. I honestly don't know a single.
I guess it comes down to the authenticity, the authenticity of orders, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? So I had just had one. Are your techniques related? You think they can be applied to any other types of signature schemes, like ring signatures or threshold?
Maybe. I honestly have not think about that. So basically, our signatures work by proving ownership of a credential, which has been issued by a group manager, and group managers do not exist in ring signatures. So I don't know, maybe it can be adapted somehow. Certainly the techniques used to prove order are orthogonal to that. So, and we have not invented them. I mean, we use hash chains, so that's a well-known technique. So I guess that something similar could be used in a ring signature, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Wait, there's a question that just asked. Yeah, so Marcus Mokov has a question. Do you have a particular automotive use case in mind, or are there other use cases?
Yeah, so well, actually the illustration that I used in the slides is one very probable use case. The speed is a very clear example to use as, because it's very easy to understand. But in general, any kind of sensor information that in which order is relevant could be applied here. Maybe even contract tracing, in which the order in which you visit some places is of course relevant to track the order, the people who may have been infected by you or otherwise. And then you have to take into account other problems like the size of the data packets that you can transmit and so on. But yeah, in general, any scenario in which order is relevant can be applied here.
Okay. So let's thank Jesus again, and we'll move to the next talk. The next talk is going to be two-party adapter signatures from identification schemes. And it's by Andreas Erwig, Sebastian Faust, Christina Hostovska, sorry, and Monosij Maitra. And Siavash Riahi is going to give the talk.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. Hi, I'm Siavash Riahi, and I will present the paper Two-Party Advanced Signatures from Identification Schemes. This is a joint work with Andreas Erwig, Sebastian Faust, Kristina Ostakova, Monosij Mitra, and me. Andreas, Sebastian, Monosij, and I are from TU Darmstadt in Germany, and Kristina is from ETH Zurich in Switzerland. So let's start with some motivation. consider the following scenario where we have two parties, Alice and Bob, where Alice has a secret value W, which is willing to give to Bob in exchange for Bob's signature on a message of Alice's choice. On the other hand, we have Bob, who is okay with revealing his signature to Alice, but he wants to be sure that if his signature is revealed, he would indeed learn this witness W. And by revealed here, I mean that the signature is publicly accessible. For example, it's published on a bulletin board, a website, or a blockchain. Now, you might be wondering, does this scenario actually happen in protocols, and do we have to tackle this? And the answer is actually yes. There are many blockchain-related applications which need to deal with such a scenario, such as conditional payments, atomic swaps, and payment channels. Let me give a high-level idea on what exactly or how exactly we're going to address such a trade. On the left-hand side, again, we have Alice with W and the message M, and on the right-hand side, we have Bob with a secret and public key for a signature scheme. Alice and Bob start communicating with each other, and at the end of their communication, Alice wants to be able to extract from the transcript of her communication with Bob and the witness a signature which is valid under Bob's public key for the message M. You can think of this M being a transaction which can be accepted by the blockchain. Then Alice at some point will publish this to the blockchain, and Bob would be able to read the signature from the blockchain. Bob then would be able to call a function given the transcript of his communication with Alice and the signature, and extract the secret value W. A recent primitive called adapter signatures actually give us the tools in order to build such a protocol. I will not get into more details how adapter signatures actually work in practice. For that, I would refer you to our paper and also previous work on this topic. And I will continue for this talk, for the purpose of this short talk, for the history of adapter signatures and where our contribution lands. So adapter signatures were first introduced in March 2017 by Polstra in a mailing list. He presented a version based on Schnorr signatures. A year later, in April 2018, Monero, Sanchez, and Kate presented an ECDSA threshold variant of adapter signatures. In 2019, Molovolta et al. Used the concept of threshold adapter signatures to build payment channels with certain properties. But the adapter signature as a primitive, as a standalone primitive, was not formalized until this point. It was in 2020 that Aumaya et al. For the first time formalized the concept of single-party adapter signatures, provided Schnorr-based and ECDSA-based constructions, and proved that these constructions are secure in their setting. In the same year, Ezgen et al. And Tayri et al. Proposed two different post-quantum secure adapter signatures. And by post-quantum, I mean that the adversary has access to a quantum computer, but the users, the normal people, do not. Their constructions are from different assumptions and also achieve slightly different properties. But until this point, there were two major open problems that have not been answered regarding adapter signatures, despite them being quite popular in the blockchain area. First, it was unclear from which class of signature schemes one can build adapter signatures. It seemed a little bit ad hoc that we first had Schnorr, then ECDSA, and then eventually we had post-quantum. It wasn't really organized or clear whether there's a class of signature schemes that can be transformed into adapter signatures. And then there is the threshold variant of adapter signatures, which was never formalized. This brings me to our contribution. We already know, based on the work of Klitz, Manzi, and Pan, how to transform ID schemes into signature schemes. We show how signature schemes from identification schemes, short SIG-ID, can be transformed into adapter signatures. We then show how this type of signature schemes can be transformed to two-party signature schemes, and how these two-party signature schemes can be transformed into two-party adapter signatures. Note that our transformation is not generic and requires the underlying SIG-ID scheme to satisfy certain properties. Okay, if you want to know more about this transformation and how we prove them, I would refer you to our paper. I would now conclude this talk in our work, we analyze which class of adapter signature schemes can be transformed into adapter signatures. For the first time, we define formally the concept of two-party adapter signatures, and we provide generic transformations from SIG-ID to adapter signatures, two-party signatures, and two-party adapter signatures. Our generic transformation also works for Schnorr, Katzwang, and Giulio Quisquato. We show this in our paper. As future works, well, and analyzing whether other classes of signature schemes can be transformed into adapter signatures would be very interesting. For example, can we transform in the standard model from other assumptions signature schemes into adapter signatures? That would be an interesting open question. And furthermore, it would be interesting to see if there are applications of adapter signatures or the two-party variant in other contexts and not necessarily in the blockchain setting. Okay, I would like to thank you all for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, contact the co-authors, or me. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's thank Siavash. Let's see if any questions.
For sure. Dr. Riani or Mr. Riani, thank you very much for your paper.
Thank you.
So this applies only to two-party trusted third-party verifications of a signature. Is that correct?
I would say so, yes. So basically the setting that we have at the moment is as follows. We want this signature to be published on some platform, and this signature should look identical to a signature that was generated without running this protocol, right? So exactly as you said. And the context, so I wouldn't call.
But it takes two trusted third parties. Or is it a subset? Is it either or?
What do you mean, two third parties?
Well, it seemed to me that your signatures were being signed by two parties.
Okay, so basically, let me put it this way. At least one of Alice or Bob must be honest, because otherwise, if both of them are corrupted, if both of them are malicious, then we have nothing to prove. All right, so one of them.
So it's an and. So it's an and function. Or is it an or function? At least one must be honest.
At least one must be honest. At least one of Alice and Bob must be honest, because otherwise we don't have anything to prove. I mean, if both of them are, usually if there is no honest party, we don't have any obligation to guarantee anything for them, or we can't because they can behave arbitrarily, right? So
so how does Bitcoin work?
Well, there you have basically a set of miners, and you have to assume that at least 50% of the computation power is honest, right? So that's
circular probability, right?
Well, the point is that blockchains exist, and we want to know how we can actually utilize them. And there are some protocols that are being executed on top of them.
Okay, so maybe in the interest of time, we'll move to the next question. Or if there's no more.
Can I ask a question, maybe? So you mentioned two-party adapter signatures. So this, I assume, this is what is needed for the payment channels application. So what are applications where you have more than two parties? Maybe. Well,
that's a very interesting question. So at least we couldn't find any reasonable applications where you have more than two parties. Like, we could artificially extend the number of parties to more than two parties, but we couldn't come up with an n-party application that requires adapter signatures. So if there is one, it would be interesting to design an n-party adapter signatures.
Because it's dead.
Hello. So we have one more question. Can one yield a lattice-based adapter signature from your generic construction?
Okay, so there is one thing that's the short answer is yes, but I have to be a little bit careful here. One of the works that I mentioned previously is based on lattice-based constructions, but there is a slight difference on the security guarantee, as I pointed out shortly. The problem is that this secret value that you're extracting here must be from a certain relation. And there, you do not have to necessarily extract the same value or a value from that relation, but a subset of that relation. So there is a slightly weaker guarantee there. But yes, the short answer is yes. It requires a little bit of modification to the definition that we have.
I see.
Which actually the authors of that paper weakened the definition in their paper. So
I see. Okay. Yeah, so let's thank Siavash again, and we'll move to the next talk. The next talk is going to be Banquet, Short and Fast Signatures from AES by Karsten Baum. Sorry. By Karsten Baum, Cyprin, Delpesh, de Saint-Guillaume, Daniel Cates, Emanuela Orsini, Peter Stoll, Greg Zavarucha. Sorry for the speaker is Karsten Baum.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm going to talk about Banquet, which is a signature scheme that gives you short and fastly generated signatures based on AES. And this is joint work, as mentioned, with Emanuela and Cyprien from COSIC in Leuven, Peter Scholl from Aarhus University, Daniel from TU Graz, and Greg from Microsoft Research. So in the interest of time, as this has to be a short talk, let me go through the key points of our constructions, which is our construction Banquet is a signature scheme that is based on the so-called MPC in the head paradigm that's recently generated a bit more interest. It signs messages as follows. Well, you generate a zero-knowledge proof of knowledge for a key for a AES plaintext ciphertext pair. And this proof of knowledge then yields your signature. And what we do is we achieve better proof size for similar runtimes in comparison to previous works, such as KKW and another work called Barbecue. And we do this by exploiting the structure of AES and the way how MPC in the head works a bit more efficiently. So how do previous signature schemes based on MPC in the head work? So I guess the most popular constructions are Picnic and KKW, where you start up from a block cipher over, let's say, the field of 2, such as AES or LowMC, for example, which is used in Picnic. You define your signing key to be a block cipher key, and your verification key is going to be a plaintext ciphertext pair, where the ciphertext is encrypted under the key K that was used as a signing key, or defined as a signing key. Now, giving this verification key, how do you sign? Well, first we construct an identification scheme, where you prove in zero knowledge that you know a key K that encrypts X to the given ciphertext. And because it's a proof of knowledge, it's not going to dig anything about your key K. But this gives you if interactive and identification scheme. And now if you apply the Fiat-Shamir transform to this and hash your message into the Fiat-Shamir transform, you get a signature scheme in a standard way. And the rationale for the efficiency here is that what matters for the signature size is the size of the proof, and an MPC in the head that scales with the number of inputs and the number of nonlinear gates to this encryption function. Now, an interesting observation in the so-called barbecue scheme was that the AES block cipher is, well, as is publicly known, is not just defined over bits, but actually you can look at this as all operations happening on blocks of bytes. And actually, everything that is happening is linear and therefore free and MPC in the head. It doesn't cost in your signature. What costs is the S-box. That's the only nonlinear step. And the S-box is actually computing an inversion of the field in the field F2 to the 8. So you take your bit string, you take your byte, you invert it over this field, and you map 0 to 0 in order to get them to have a complete S-box, and that is that, right? So what they did in barbecue was then to make a better and more efficient signature scheme by evaluating the circuits for the encryption function over F2 to the 8 instead of F2 as was done before. Our observation in Bankit is, well, instead of computing the encryption function forward of the block cipher, why not just verify that the encryption function was applied correctly, or you can do this correctly? The idea is, well, the prover or the signer in this case, he knows for each S-box what is the input because he has the key and he has the plaintext and he has the ciphertext, right? So he also knows the output of the S-box. So he could provide the output of the S-box as part of the verification circuit, as input to the verification circuit. So instead of forward evaluating the encryption function in the zero-knowledge proof, you just check that all of these inputs and outputs of S-boxes multiply to 1. And now we do the same operation all over again and again and again, and this gives rise to being able to use amortization. And so for M S-boxes that you have to do in AES, right, we only have to communicate square root of M field elements using a amortized proof by Bonnet et al. And this allows us to save in terms of signature size because we reduce the communication of the zero-knowledge proof. In terms of implementation, so we fully implemented our scheme and gave a proof of security in the random oracle model, assuming that AES in a certain way acts as a one-way function. We lose 2 to 3 bits of security, as we can only support a choice of keys and plain text that don't lead to S-boxes that have 0 input, because 0 times something is never going to be 1, so verification is going to be a bit hard. In terms of runtime, our construction that you can see here for runtime numbers is comparable with Picnic 3, which is a candidate for the post-quantum NIST post-quantum challenge. So for the same sign and verification time, we get, say, 50% larger signature size. But if you scale up the number of parties, we get, something that is that's comparable in size to Picnic 3. Interestingly, we don't have to use a non-standard block cipher, but we can use AES instead of LowMC, where there have been a bit of, it has been a bit shaky recently if this is a good block cipher for, signatures or not. And then if we take another candidate and compare with that, which would be, for example, Sphinx Plus, then we can see that we can, if we compare with Sphinx Plus Fast, that, our verification time is not as good, but we have comparable signature size. And if we look at Sphinx Small, well, we can't reach their signature size, unfortunately, but our signing time is definitely a lot better. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you would like to know more, I highly recommend Cyprien's extended talk that was uploaded to the website of the conference. And I'd also recommend you to have a look at our full version, which is on ePrint. Thanks. And Adam, you're muted.
Sorry, I was saying let's thank Karsten and take any questions. So
there's one on the chat.
So, I think there's a question by Stanislav Verrecki. Intuitively, if you reveal intermediate values in AES computation, input outputs of S-boxes, why is it then that you are not leaking any info on the AES key, which is the signature key, so the signature remains unforgeable? So good question. So we don't actually reveal all these intermediate values. So since it's a zero knowledge proof, everything that happens in the verification is only happening inside the zero knowledge proof. So you can neatly simulate that. All you actually know on what is going on, and this is true, is that you know that that the inputs to the S boxes will never be zero. But we argue in our paper why this is actually not a problem for security. Actually, let me say that approximately, I think 30% of all AES instances, if you choose your key and your input, what you encrypt at random, would give you S boxes that have non-zero input. So if this would be easy to solve, then we have broken a lot of AES instances.
Okay, so there's another question from Daniel, which says, Banquet using AES instead of LowMC is great for security. It seems to cost a little more than the other options. Do you think that there's a good chance to further improve the efficiency of future Banquet variants or iterations while maintaining the stronger security posture?
Very good questions. Very good question. So I think that's, I unfortunately don't see an immediate way of improving Banquets. I'd recommend you to have a look at this year's CCS, as some of our co-authors have been working on a similar protocol that does a better signature size with comparable signing verification time. And yeah, that's all I can say.
What about versions of Rheindal itself, like Rheindal 256?
So we could get away with less rounds of AES of the round function as was proposed, but the whole point of our work was to have to use a standard primitive such as AES as it has been standardized in the process, and not do simplifications of AES that's let's say more non-standard that would allow for a better proof size. Like if we say we want to replace LowMC with a better block cipher or more tested block cipher, then we shouldn't go to we remove rounds from the block cipher that we're using.
No, absolutely. But I thought that Rheindal had been proved out to 256.
Yeah, so the proof techniques in the paper will work for Rheindal just as well as
I guess they should, yeah.
Yeah, I think we even have some size estimates there for the 256-bit block size.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, that's great.
Yeah, any other questions? So how does the performance compare to more standard signature schemes like not post-quantum signature schemes? What's the overhead?
So let me first say we don't have a proof that this is a post-quantum candidate secure scheme. So it falls in the same category as other schemes such as Picnic, but I'd be careful to claim that it's post-quantum secure. I don't have runtimes in mind. I guess we do quite a bit worse than some public key schemes that are out there.
Okay.
In particular, when it comes to signature size. I mean, all that you've seen before in this session is having signatures a lot smaller than what we have.
Markov asks a couple of other questions. What do you think about improving MPC-friendly block ciphers, and should we standardize block ciphers for special cryptographic applications such as zero-knowledge proof or MPC?
Good question, Markov. Thanks. so I am not an expert in symmetric key cryptography, so I can't say much about if this is a good idea or not. The approaches that have been there have some of them have failed. Some of them are doing well. There's now this rescue prime, for example, which has been proposed, which is a hash function. This is zero knowledge proof friendly. What we tried to show in our work here was, well, if you use standard tested primitives, you're not so far away from what you can do with highly optimized block ciphers for that setting. And actually, there exist other block ciphers that are used that are based on, for example, the Legendre symbol, which would give you a lot smaller, a lot smaller signature size. But again, it's we want to use something that is tested for 20 years, such as AES. But it's always obviously an interesting research direction.
Cool. Okay. Any other question, or should we wrap up? Okay, so let's thank Karshan again, and don't know if I think there's a social hour. I don't know how we transition to that. Go on, Dina.